Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I've had a couple subscribers in videos I've made recently say, you're really biased towards barbell work and weighted body weight exercises, and I think that clouds your view on certain things. And so I actually want to address that criticism. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. All right, what people need to understand, the reason I have that bias is not because I've always had that bias and I started there. The reason I am biased towards barbell exercises and weighted body weight exercises is that I believe that they are the superior way to resistance train for 95% of people's goals at any one given time. And notice I didn't say 100%, I said 95%. In other words, there's probably 1 out of 20 people out there who right now could find benefits, and actually different methods might be superior for what they're trying to do. But the overwhelming majority, that isn't the case. And again, it's not because I had that bias to start. That's a bias I had developed from observing lifters in the gym, athletes in the gym, observing myself, observing other people, reading tons of research, looking at tons of physiology textbooks. Those are the conclusions I've drawn that has given me that bias. So it's not a bias that I just said one day, I think the deadlift and the chin-up are the greatest exercises ever, and therefore I'm going to bias everything in that direction. And the reasons I hold that view is that I view them as superior training tools. And the number one reason on that list is because I've observed over the years that any efforts to isolate muscles produces inferior results. In other words, for me, my biceps don't grow when I do a bunch of extra curls. Right? People will say that oftentimes, well, your arms aren't the best, or whatever, and that's a valid criticism. But if you were to say that, you're proving me right. Because I'm one of those guys who has done years and years of curls and tricep extensions at a time, and I don't find when I take them out that my arms grow any differently. Meaning, in fact, whenever my pressing is getting stronger, my triceps grow whether I'm doing isolation work or not. Not even a factor. I can take my 10 sets of tricep extensions out and notice my arms will keep growing at the same rate in proportion to my pressing strength improving or weighted dip strength improving, but I get less tendonitis. In fact, if I get less tendonitis, I can do more pressing work, and then my lumbars go up faster, my triceps seem to grow again. And what that comes down to is that that's just an observation. And then I go look at the scientific research. I look at the literature, and there isn't data supporting the hypothesis that adding isolation work when you're getting sufficient volume and sufficient training loads with big compounds, isolation work doesn't seem to add any further muscle mass gains. Doesn't mean that isolation work doesn't work on its own. We find that if you do curls, a bunch of curls every week, your arms grow, your biceps grow in lats just as fast as if you do lat pull downs, is if you take the lat pull downs out. But if a person does a bunch of lat pull downs with enough volume, and again, that's not even going to a barbell exercise or a weighted body weight, their biceps don't grow any faster when they throw 3 or 6 or 10 sets of curls in every week in addition to the lat pull downs. You don't see that group gain muscle faster. Same thing, bench press versus tricep extensions. They don't seem to produce faster arm growth. It doesn't seem to happen in a lab when we test people, and it's been tested in novices, it's been tested in people with over a year of training experience. No difference. Same thing, you start isolating muscles versus compounds, and what we find from a strength perspective, the people who gain the same amount of muscle in their thighs or their biceps from doing a compound movement, like a squat or a weighted chin-up, if they gain the same amount of muscle and we compare it in different groups versus people who use a leg extension or a curl to build that muscle, the people who use the compound actually are stronger on the isolation movement. So we can talk about sport specificity. Your triceps, biceps, quads, things like that actually get stronger when we test you on a machine to see when the muscle is isolated, if it gained more strength. And it gains more strength if you build that muscle with a compound movement. The same amount of muscle versus an isolation movement when it's been tested. When I see studies like that, that suggests to me that any exercise that attempts to start taking muscles out produces inferior strength also. And so in what world are we trying to not gain strength? Because people say, well, I just want to be big. I don't care about being strong. Well, unless you're planning on using grams and grams of gear and growth hormone, that's not going to matter either. That's not going to work. Because again, other data done by people who actually lift. People who actually lift, Greg Knuckles, Brett Contreras, Brad Schoenfeld, they compiled all that data. What did they find? The number one factor in determining how much a person's max squat was, their max squat, was how much muscle they had relative to how tall they were. So a shorter person could squat more with less muscle. So the height variable factored in. The amount of muscle you have relative to your height was the biggest factor. It determined at least 85 to 90% of the estimation of your one max squat could be calculated based on that. Other training, all the other stuff was a minor variable combined, accounted for only a tiny little percent. So in other words, size equaled strength. So when we look at it from that perspective, using the biggest exercises that involve the most muscle mass will put the most size on you. It will put the most strength on you. The compiled data on that is overwhelming. So therefore I step back and ask, do we really need to be doing much else? And there are instances in which you might, but most of you are not in that situation. So why barbells? Well, because barbells allow you to load things. They allow you to tune things easier. In other words, you can get little micro plates and you can increase a 400-pound barbell 1 pound at a time. You could take it to 401, 402, 403. It allows for better micro loading. And when compared to things like dumbbells, you can use more weight usually through the same range of motion while still involving just as many muscles. In other words, you don't recruit more muscles all of a sudden when you go to a dumbbell, because a lot of the stabilizers people are talking about are also recruited with the barbell. It's just that certain smaller stabilizers struggle to keep things in place, and you struggle to keep things in place, but even the biggest muscles involved, you do not get as much involvement from them because the tension itself goes down. So barbells are overall a better training tool due to the ability to fine adjust and move the most weight involving the most muscles, whereas in machines really start taking muscles out. So machines fall way behind in terms of total muscle fiber recruitment because they're taking you back in the direction of really isolating things. Barbells give you the best balance there between the ability to load the heaviest weight while involving the most muscles. And they give you a lot of diversity of exercises that you can do while allowing you to micro-load things. You can micro-load a hell of a lot better than you can with a kettlebell, a dumbbell, anything else. As far as why weighted body weight exercise is amazing, because again, the amount of muscles involved, we come back at that point of removing muscles from an exercise causes less muscle growth. Weighted chin-ups involve more total muscle than a lat pull down, a machine row, a machine pull down. A weighted dip involves way more muscles than, again, a lot of other exercises. Arguably, things that move the body through space have an advantage even over barbells, but the big deal is there's a lot of barbell exercises in which you can move the body through space. In fact, the majority of them you can. The only stuff you're not is sometimes a strict standing press, a really strict Pendlay row, or bench press. Everything else, your body moves through space, so you get that advantage. The squat, the deadlift, the power clean, the push press, the snatch. All those exercises are barbell exercises that also move the body through space. Those are weighted body weight exercises, just like a chin-up, just like a dip is, but they happen to use a barbell. So because of all of these factors, it just becomes obvious to me after observing all the research, observing people, that barbells and weighted body weight exercises produce superior results. They produce superior results for most people's goals. Now, someone said, well, when would a person want to isolate a muscle? A person would want to potentially isolate a muscle when they are literally happy with every other muscle in their entire body. They do not want anything else in their body to get bigger or stronger, maybe for a weight class, maybe for some physique reason, bodybuilding reason, and they have one muscle somewhere in their body that they need to bring up. One muscle and one muscle only. that you do not want to stimulate additional growth. But if you're in a situation where you have multiple muscles that you need to bring up still, isolation becomes pointless. It becomes silly. And that should be common sense. Since we know compound movements produce more strength, and more strength equals more size in the long term, and just as much size as isolating, it doesn't make sense to. In other words, if your pecs, delts, and triceps all need to come up, overhead pressing, weighted dips, bench presses, things like that make a lot more sense than trying to isolate the pecs or isolate the triceps. But if you're in a situation to where your pectoral size and strength of your pecs, your delts, everything else are perfect, but your triceps need to come up, that's when it might make sense to isolate a muscle. But only in the situation where you 100% are certain you do not want anything but the triceps to grow, so you keep the load the same on everything else. The only time it makes sense to isolate a muscle. Outside of that, I just can't recommend it. There's no logical reason to do so, barring that situation. Now, does that mean you can do something illogical? Yes. So just like when I say all these are superior exercises, does that mean you should never ever do anything else? No. If you want to go do something else and you just feel that you need that in your routine for whatever reason, that's fine. Do so. It's your training. It's your body. Do so. If you feel that you have to perform an exercise that's not a barbell exercise or not a weighted body weight movement, and you feel that you just have to, you need it for your happiness, for your fulfillment, for your perceived goals, that's okay. That's okay. I'm just saying that it isn't going to put as much size and strength on you as the others will. That's all that I'm saying. That's what my bias has concluded. That's the reason I have the biases observing that over the years. I think everything else is largely a waste of time, but the word largely doesn't mean 100% waste. And that's where people don't understand that. I'm not saying that you can't do anything else or that you're stupid if you do something else. I'm saying everything else is, for the most part, most of the time, a misallocation of gym resources, training time, recovery. That's all that I'm saying. I'm not saying you can't do anything else, like it's some dogmatic set in stone rule, because it's not. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.